Once more, our Exile returns to Noodle's complete lore series on Path of Exile. This video covers Thaumaturgy and Virtue Gems. Let's get started. In the world of Path of Exile, multiple civilizations throughout history have dabbled with a magic called Thaumaturgy. The definition of Thaumaturgy is the capability of a magician to work magic or miracles, and in Path of Exile specifically, it refers to magic used to empower and transform beings and objects. In this world, Thaumaturgy is primarily accessed through gems, called Virtue Gems in modern times, and Tears of Magie by ancient Vaal. Thaumaturgists can manipulate and utilize gems for various magics, including gaining powers. These powers range widely from attacks, defensive measures, buffs, curses, minions, etc. But what are these Virtue Gems? Where do they come from? How do we access the power of gems? And what are the consequences of the use of these gems in the world of Path of Exile? The uses of Thaumaturgy have varied between civilizations. The first recorded use of Thaumaturgy was amongst the Vaal, a society that stretched from before 900 BIC until 400 BIC. IC meaning Imperialis Conceptus, the founding of the Eternal Empire. For reference, our current exile lands in Wraeclast in 1599 IC, almost 2,000 years after the fall of the Vaal in 400 BIC. The Vaal used virtue gems they called the Tears of Magie in their Thaumaturgy. The Eternal Empire, when founded by Tarkus Varuso in 1 IC, banned Thaumaturgy and sought to bury or destroy all evidence and forms of Thaumaturgy. The Eternal Emperor Chittus Parandus, who began ruling in 1319 IC, was a fan of Thaumaturgy and promoted the creation and use of the type of virtue gems our exile uses. However, in 1334 IC, the High Templar Vaal led the successful Purity Rebellion, with much support across Wraeclast and Oriath, to ban Thaumaturgy once more. His plans for purity were ruined by a cunning thaumaturgist Malachi, who caused the massive apocalyptic event on Wraeclast called the Cataclysm in 1336 IC. In current times, 1599 IC, the High Templar Dominus has reinvigorated interest in Thaumaturgy, using experimental Thaumaturgy across the sea from his seat in Oriath on the devastated land of Wraeclast. As we can see, the use and opinion of Thaumaturgy and Virtue Gems has been in flux for all recorded history. But long before the first records of history and the Vaal's use of the Tears of Magie, there were gods on Wraeclast. While many of the same civilizations were present that we see today, such as the Azmiri, Vaal, Karui, Ezamites, and Mariketh, these civilizations were affected by the wills and powers of these gods. Some of these gods were primal gods like Sin, Innocence, or the Karui god Kitava, who were born as gods. Many of these gods were humans who, through extreme acts, rose to godliness. Sin says that there was a time before the beast, bathed in the shadows of lost memory, when men and women like you could ascend. Through rareness of quality and the adoration of their people, these few could reach out into the quickening mists of immortality and grasp the power of godhood. These gods and mortals who ascended to godhood had some form of magic and powers. But this ancient magic is not the same as the Thaumaturgy we see and utilize in our playthrough. Sin created an entity called the Beast, using the Dark Ember, which Sin describes as a seed, the black core of the beast's heart. It is the pure, undiluted essence of corruption. The Beast was created by Sin as a tool to stop rampaging gods from destroying humanity by putting all of them to sleep with its power. Sin's own former wife, Garukan, and their daughter, Shikari, had planned to wage a war that would likely destroy humanity. Shikari built an army and would have conquered the very sky had not the beast soothed her into a peaceful oblivion. As all the gods went to sleep, the beast and its essence of corruption influenced the land, and the gems that became the Tears of Magie and Virtue Gems began forming in the cave system under Highgate, and specifically Mount Varuso, where the beast resides. Garukan and Shikari were Mariketh gods, a civilization based in the Vastiri Plains just east of the beast's location. While the creation of the beast saved humanity, its power was felt by mankind as well, and this power influenced some to seek its source. The two thaumaturgists who directly interacted with the beast, Doriani and Malachi, described hearing voices in their dreams. Doriani said, "In my dream, a voice spoke to me. It said, 'My reach knows no bounds. All that is pure is destined to rot. All that lives is destined to serve.'" While the quest for power was a large factor in their lives, perhaps the beast's ember, this essence of corruption, affected or even sought their actions. The beast is also referred to as nightmare, which is perhaps a reference to its power of sleep, and definitely a reference to its influence on dreams. The beast's power of nightmare is, in fact, the power behind all thaumaturgy, including but not limited to virtue gems. Piety, a powerful thaumaturgist working with High Templar Dominus, tells us that the beast is the source of all thaumaturgy, the one power in this world that transforms what is real into what is imagined. The idea of creating what is imagined into what is real is particularly poignant considering the beast's power over dreams. By putting gods to sleep, the beast has manifested sleep and dreams as this nightmare, a tangible force that allows thaumaturgists to bridge the gap between reality and the magic of dreams, the imagined. All acts of thaumaturgy since the creation of the beast are possible because of this power of nightmare. It seems these gems need some form of thaumaturgical manipulation to become the usable tiers of magie or virtue gems as we know them. First, let's discuss the methods of the Vaal. The Vaal powered the tiers of magie with a form of blood thaumaturgy. The Vaal sacrificed people, and these sacrifices fueled their gems. Our chosen exile can utilize tiers of magie, called Vaal gems in-game, but rather than working with mana, these gems gain incremental charges until ready by accumulating the souls of enemies we kill. So there is a distinct functional difference between tiers of magie and current virtue gems. The Vaal used these gems throughout their history, likely since the creation of the beast. As far back as 900 BIC, when the Vaal and Asmiri began peaceful coexistence, the Asmiri described the Vaal as having their flesh adorned with glittering crystals, being unaware of the significance of these gems. The Vaal did not share the meaning or use of their tiers of magie with the Asmiri, even though they shared many other aspects of their society such as written language and technology. They probably wanted to retain an upper hand on the Asmiri, as in the past, Vaal, like the god Wraeclast, had enslaved and killed Asmiri. Perhaps they also wanted to hide the violent and depraved sacrifices they performed to use these gems. The ability to use souls from sacrifices to fuel their tiers of magie comes from the connection between the gems and life force. The flavor text of the Soul Tether belt reads, "Vaal blood priests were among the earliest intellectuals on record. It was they who found that a newly freed soul would desperately cling to any other source of life." The power of the beast and thaumaturgy seems to be a form of intelligence or life manifested into gems. Malachi, the most prolific thaumaturgist in recent history, had much insight into the nature of gems, their intelligence, and the beast. Malachi wrote, "The moment my fingertips brushed the cool, silken plains of the first gem, I felt it. My skull ached as if its contents were growing, pressing against the bone, searching for a way to break free. That night, once the wine had dulled the pain enough to allow the onset of sleep, the dreams began. I have not been without them since, nor would I be. Every spark of thaumaturgy that I wield, every device that I forge, every creature that I transfigure, I owe to these lessons cloaked in nightmare." Like Doriani, the nightmare speaks to Malachi, but he also gains intelligence and inspiration from his first physical contact with virtue gems. He tells Inquisitor Malagaro, in relation to Malagaro's creation of his map, Malagaro's Sanctum, that if you were to attempt to transmogrify, which means transforming in a surprising or magical manner, a virtue gem without the proper mental preparation, you will be a puppet master working strings made of vipers. Remember, these gems are phantasms in crystalline form, alive with volitions inscrutable, meaning powers impossible to comprehend. Malachi characterizes the gems as each having a life of their own, or being some kind of life force physically manifested as gems. When the Vaal say the souls of their sacrifices cling to the gem, it is because they seek a new body that has life. The flavor text of the Vaal Caress gloves says, "The gems are strangely human at times. They simply love to be held." The tears of Magi used by the Vaal literally had souls inside them as fuel, holding both the gem's life and one or more human souls. This blood thaumaturgy was the first known way to access the powers in the gems. Doriani, who lived during the reign of Queen Adziri near 400 BIC and brought about the fall of the Vaal, was arguably a more prolific thaumaturgist than Malachi. This will be covered more in my video about the Vaal, but Queen Adziri sought eternal beauty and life, much like a god. In pursuit of Adziri's immortality, Doriani performed many sacrifices and thaumaturgical experiments. Through Doriani's studies, he discovered the beast or nightmare as the source of thaumaturgy. The nightmare spoke in Doriani's dreams, as it did Malachi's, and gave him inspiration for his advancements in blood thaumaturgy. In Act 9, we enter a wound Doriani made to enter the beast, another parallel to Malachi's journey. This path to the beast was called Doriani's Cradle, and the events that transpired caused the fall of the Vaal. While the details of this event will be covered in the Vaal video, it's relevant that they carried their virtue gems to Doriani's Cradle for this ritual. The flavor text on Doriani's catalyst says, "The result of the catalytic reaction would be either immortality for all or death for all," which implies that the virtue gems and the beast had some reaction that, as we know, led to the fall of the Vaal, the death of millions, including Doriani and Adziri, leaving only 3,126 Vaal alive. This fall in 400 BIC was incredibly similar to the cataclysm caused by Malachi's communion with the beast in 1336 IC. As a historian wrote, "So many have fallen, so many have changed," suggesting not only death but mutations like the undying we witness ourselves. This is speculation, but since the beast's domain is over dreams and nightmare, perhaps the introduction of reality, these men and the physical gems, to the realm of the imaginary is the reaction Doriani anticipated and that resulted in these two catastrophic events. The blood thaumaturgy of the Vaal was not used by the Eternals or the Templars who utilized virtue gems in more recent history, with some exceptions. Templar Devarro studied artifacts about the Vaal brought for High Templar Dominus. Through these artifacts, he writes that he learnt a spell, blood thaumaturgy, forbidden by the Templars, but they have no idea as to the power they have ignored. Templar Devarro, after reading these Vaal artifacts, had delusions that he could unite with Queen Adziri through blood thaumaturgy. He kidnapped 2 children and killed them and himself, hoping to be a family with Adziri in another world. Malachi might have also dabbled in blood thaumaturgy as shown in the Eternal Residence memory during Synthesis League. The memory states, Malachi says he has perfected techniques that will unlock the raw power hidden within the virtue gems. I have volunteered my body to the cause. We do see many examples of thaumaturgists using virtue gems on subjects to transform them without sacrifice. Many people during the time of Emperor Chittis had gems embedded or implanted to enhance themselves, including the Emperor. But Malachi did use blood to alter the properties of virtue gems. When Malachi is instructing Chevron on her creation of Brutus, done by implanting 1 or more virtue gems into his flesh, Malachi writes, "As to your need to accelerate the implantation process, dip the gem in a boiling solution of 6 parts blood and 1 part thaumatic sulfite for no more than 13 seconds. Any longer and you'll invite the crystal's wrath. Once the gem is withdrawn from the solution, you have but a few seconds to install the gem in the prepared flesh and close the wound. Should the gem cool too much prior to implantation, it will become inert and you're patient with it." Thaumatic sulfite was a byproduct of gem refining, and the use of blood implies this was thaumaturgy inspired by the Vaal's Tears of Magi. the virtue gem's powers and potency can be altered by techniques of thaumaturgy. This experimentation and transformation of virtue gems might be what gives gems different powers. The virtue gems have their own natural thaumaturgy, but the experimentation and proficiency of thaumaturgists was needed to unlock, transform, and improve that magic. More recent virtue gems are utilized with mana, which is a common trope in games representing magical power. There isn't a clear lore explanation of our utilization of mana, but it's likely some thaumaturgical innovation that can imbue gems with fuel, like a soul, without needing a sacrifice. Or perhaps it's simply a classical game mechanic. Either way, more recent thaumaturgists have not needed to use souls to invent or utilize thaumaturgy and gems. Since we've seen examples of people implanting gems fully into themselves or even embedding gems into their flesh with the gems still visible, one might wonder how we, as our current exile, utilize these gems. Luckily, to use the gems, one does not have to surgically insert the gems into their skin or go full Hector Titusius and replace every joint in their body with gems. It does seem that the implanting of virtue gems had more powerful effects, but they were also more devastating. We use the gems by placing them in literal sockets on our gear. This is a game mechanic that is actually literal. The separation of the gem from our skin helps prevent the potentially damaging influence of the gems over us, although we aren't exactly heroes in the story. Take, for example, the Star of Wraeclast, a necklace featuring the virtue gem once embedded in Kalisa Moss's throat. Kalisa was a contemporary of Victario, who was a key figure in the Purity Rebellion of 1334 IC. At this time, implanting virtue gems was a sign of class and power, encouraged by the thaumaturgical fanatic Emperor Chidus Parandus. Kalisa was a famous opera singer who had the gem implanted in her throat to enhance her voice. Victario writes of her performance after having the virtue gem implanted that the gem at Kalisa's throat sparkled with starlight brilliance as her C-sharp shattered every pane of glass in the auditorium. When she died, the gem in her throat was taken and put into the necklace now known as the Star of Wraeclast. When Duresso gave the Star of Wraeclast to Mervail as a wedding gift, Mervail simply wore the necklace, but the gem had contact with the skin of her throat. This contact was enough to influence Mervail, giving her singing abilities like Kalisa, but also slowly turning her into a monstrous and deranged siren. While our use of the virtue gems in our clothing likely reduces this influence, it does make you wonder if we are completely safe from the transformative effects of wielding virtue gems. But thaumaturgy does not only come in the form of virtue gems. The gems fuel acts of thaumaturgy, but we've seen many uses beyond granting skills. Malagaro used thaumaturgy to create powerful elixirs and poisons like the Calibric Extantia or Essence of Virtue Gem. He also transformed animals, such as the Great White Beast or the spiders, the Weaver or Black Death, as well as his faithful servant Raulo, turning him into a hybrid human spider he named Fidelitas. Malachi created the decanter Spiritist, which Fairgrave seeks in Act 3 to drink a substance called ghost wine. The decanter could make a spiritual liquid corporeal, a transformation of the intangible to the physical. The creation of maps and the devices used to access them are thaumaturgical. Dominus's transportation device, used to hide his travel to Wraeclast, where he and Piety performed their thaumaturgical experiments, was said to need an immense amount of thaumaturgical energy to execute the successful disintegration and transmission of objects between Highgate and Theopolis. For that kind of power, we must tap the Origin, which refers to the beast dwelling below Highgate and Mount Veruso. And the catastrophic events of the fall of the Vaal and the more recent cataclysm were both created by thaumaturgists seeking to commune with the source of thaumaturgy, the beast. Quick note, there is another type of gem that we use referred to as jewels. These function differently than virtue gems in that they enhance stats rather than granting skills. They are also used on the skill tree rather than slots in our gear. The distinction between the term gem and jewel could be to reduce players' confusion because of their different functions, if they're actually both virtue gems, or it could mean they are not gems from the beast like virtue gems at all. In support of the second interpretation, there's also the introduction of Abyss Jewels, which can be slotted into Abyss Gear or the skill tree, but still function as stat-enhancing items rather than skill-granting gems. The skill tree is probably not a physical object we literally allocate points into. It's more likely a symbolic representation of our growing power and the paths we choose to improve. For these reasons, I can't equate jewels and gems. There are some aspects of Path of Exile that you can chalk up to necessary game mechanics rather than meaningful story elements. Although I do love imagining each exile washing up on Wraeclast with a giant identical magical parchment and literally drawing a map of their own abilities on it as they progress, gluing little jewels into it if they choose to map into jewel slots. But if you have any more information on the lore of jewels and their relationship to virtue gems, please leave me a comment. In the same vein, we see many of the returned gods starting in Act 5 using skills that we see from the virtue gems. I do believe that the power of gods might be an influence on the nightmare and thaumaturgy that the beast produces. Since the beast's power is to put all the gods in existence to sleep, it must have some constant connection to these gods. Perhaps the manifestations of different skills in the gems aren't influenced by the thaumaturgists that manipulate them, but the virtue gems have their own innate abilities that determine the skills of each gem, which are actually powers taken from the slumbering gods. Again, the similarity between the skills we can use from gems and the skills gods use could simply be a reality of game design. There's only so many animations and assets you can expect from a game. The variety of skills in Path of Exile is vast, so creating completely new sets of skills for enemy gods to use could be difficult or unrealistic, and could arguably rob players of the ability to recognize and combat mechanics of fights. So I'm unsure whether the thaumaturgy introduced by the beast's creation is entirely its own, or a manifestation of powers from the gods it's subduing. It is probably some mixture of the two. But I do think thaumaturgists could alter the properties of gems, which to me suggests they could also influence the skills those gems grant. There are some questions still about the nature of thaumaturgy, especially in regards to the history of the Vaal. When fighting gods, we come across a few gods whose history suggests they dabbled in thaumaturgy. But how is this possible if the beast was the absolute beginning of thaumaturgy in the world? I don't doubt that gods had powers and that thaumaturgy after the beast was imbued with these powers, but the information is contradictory. For example, Ugol was a Vaal scholar before he ascended to godhood. He believed that terror was the only universal experience, and therefore had some great power. He would torture children and try to capture their terror in devices Sin called Eldritch Mirrors. But Hargan says Ugol was scarring the living shite out of Vaal toddlers and then nabbing their fear within a hall of thaumaturgical mirrors. Perhaps Hargan doesn't know the difference between thaumaturgical and eldritch, and it's a meaningful distinction. But assuming it is thaumaturgical, how could a human use thaumaturgy before the beast's creation? Sin even says that through his gallery of reflected terror, Ugol came to understand human nature so well that he was able to manipulate his way into the Vaal halls of leadership, and eventually grew so feared and renowned that he ascended into godhood. This means he absolutely used these mirrors and this magic before he was a god. Another scholar god was Aberath, the original goat man. While Sin refers to him as an alchemist, he was able to burn away the flesh to liquidate the life force within, a libation he consumed with both frequency and alacrity. Turning beasts and humans into a consumable life force is reminiscent of the Vaal's sacrifices powering the Tears of Magi, the description of life within the gems, and Malagaro's Calibric Extantia, a liquid essence of virtue gem. Now, I do believe there must be some kind of magic in the world before the beast's creation, as gods existed, had magic, and people could become gods. Perhaps this magic was just harder for humans to specifically utilize, and was just made more easily accessible in the manifested form of gems by the beast's power of nightmare. But the lore does imply that the beast is the source of all thaumaturgy, and Sin makes interesting distinctions such as Eldritch and Alchemist for Ugol and Aberath. Maybe the beast's power wasn't to create thaumaturgy in the world, but to distill it into an easily accessible form via the virtue gems. It is unclear if the beast's nightmare and the resulting access to thaumaturgy is the first real magic, a new form of magic, or just access to magic of the slumbering gods. To defeat the final god, Kitava, in the acts of Path of Exile, we must restore the power of the beast. The beast's presence and its nightmare is what gives us enough power to defeat Kitava, but we are also assisted by Innocence, and it is Innocence's power that can penetrate Kitava's magical barricade. It's possible the magic of the gods is some opposing force to the beast's nightmare, or that thaumaturgy is a more powerful form of magic than the old magic. We do know that the beast's nightmare made a thaumaturgy available to humans that sought it, and we are able to use this thaumaturgy in the form of virtue gems to destroy the beast, the gods, and anyone who dares stand in our way. Thank you so much for watching. It's your boy Noodle. If you like this video, check out Acts 1 through 10 and look out for future videos. Thanks so much to my patrons. I couldn't do this series without your help. If you want to check out my Twitch or other social media or watch more of these videos, links are below. And until next time, stay sane, Exile. Choke